Mount Laurel, a historic Paulsdale, birthplace of New Jersey's own Alice Paul, and a fitting monument to her life's work. And one of the longest, most difficult journeys in American history began right here, at the place that Alice Paul called the family home farm. For the last quarter century, her legacy has been richly preserved here through the good work of the Alice Paul Institute, maintaining all that Paulsdale represents, and bringing along the next generation of young leaders who will take up the torch that will light the way to full and total equal rights for women in our lifetime. Yes. So today we gather to celebrate the past, assess the progress we have made over the years, and work to keep moving forward to a time when a young woman will toss the last fallen piece of the glass ceiling into the dustbin of history. Women's Equality Day at Paulsdale has been an annual event, but of course this year is unlike any other. August 26th, a few days from now, will mark the 90th anniversary of the passage in 1920 of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. It marks the 25th anniversary of the Alice Paul Institute, not to mention the induction of Alice Paul into the New Jersey Hall of Fame, as well as the release of the first biography of Alice Paul by Mary Walton, who I know you're going to be hearing from shortly. And if that isn't enough, this year we remember with gratitude and a little New Jersey pride that Alice Paul's 125th birthday would have been celebrated, and the gift of her well-lived life to the history of not just this state but this country. Yeah. So I'm honored to be part of this year's 5-part celebration of women's history, women's rights here in America, and in fact to add a little bit of a 6th part of that celebration. Earlier this year I began what I intend to be an annual tradition, the presentation of the Robert Menendez Trailblazer Awards to 6 of New Jersey's most distinguished women. I think that some of you may know, but my mother, who passed away after a long battle with Alzheimer's disease this past October, is who I named that award after. She was a strong woman, a trailblazer to me in every sense of the word. And as I pointed out at the award ceremony, her name, Evangelina, breaks down to Eva for Eve, the first woman, and Angelina for the angel that she was. I felt I wanted to do something to honor her life and her memory, so I began the first annual Trailblazers Award in her name. And I believe next year it would be fitting to recommend to the committee that Alice Paul posthumously be one of the next recipients of the Evangelina Award. No one could be more of a trailblazer than the First Lady of Paulsdale. And looking out at this crowd today, I'm reminded of another trailblazing woman, Sojourner Truth, who looked out at one of the first women's conventions in America in 1851 and said, "If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, these women together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again." And the men better just let them do it. And I think that every woman here, like Sojourner Truth, like Alice Paul, have the power to turn the world right side up again, and sometimes the best thing is for us to just move out of the way. Having said that, as a nation, we've made some significant progress over the years on women's issues, but we have a long way to go. It may be true that women have found their way into the workforce, 71 million of them, but not enough of them have made it into the boardrooms and onto executive teams of major corporations. Some of you may have read that I recently announced the results of a diversity survey that I conducted from the Senate of the Fortune 500 companies. I wanted to know how closely the leadership of our nation's top 500 corporations reflect the face of America in the 21st century. How closely corporate America reflects the fact that more than 50% of our population are women and 35% are minorities. As a matter of fact, according to the U.S. Women's Chamber of Commerce, women control $4.3 trillion in consumer spending in this country. $4.3 trillion is a pretty astronomical figure. Yet the survey showed that the leadership of our nation's corporations, though clearly benefiting for the diversity of our population does not reflect that diversity. We found that although women represent more than 50% of the population, only about 14.5% of directors are women. That's less than a third of their percentage of the population. We found that they did a little better when it comes to executive management teams, accounting for about 20% of both CEOs and those who report to a CEO. But they are still significantly underrepresented at the executive team level, accounting for just half of their percentage of the population. So it's clear that so many years after Alice Paul's struggle for equality, real progress has been a slow slog. Here we are more than 150 years later. We're still looking up at a glass ceiling, cracked in places, but for the most part unbroken, with women earning a median annual income of $36,000, 77 cents for every dollar a man earns. And that's why I'm proud to have helped pass the Lilly Ledbetter Law, which says that equal pay for equal work is the law of the land, not just simply a slogan anymore. I think that was incredible. We can celebrate victories like the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920, but 90 years later, in a nation of 155.8 million women, 66% of whom vote, compared to 62% of men, there are still not enough women in Congress, still not enough women in state legislators, in city halls, governor's offices, or in boardrooms, or on the executive teams of America's corporations. In fact, it's interesting to note in history that it wasn't until Franklin Roosevelt appointed Frances Perkins, the labor secretary, a woman had not sat in the cabinet room of our country. And there still hasn't been a woman in the Oval Office, but that day will come. It almost did, and I believe it will come in our lifetime. Now, since I've entered public service, when it comes to equal rights for women, to equal pay for equal treatment of women in the workplace, to quality, affordable health care for women and children, I have done my best to live up to the example set for me all my life by the trailblazing woman in my life. My mother showed me in how she lived what it means to accept all that life brings with all of its challenges with grace and dignity. She showed me that you can start anew, you can leave everything behind and begin again, to take a chance, make your own way, and make it count without concern for gender or race or what faith you are. She was the embodiment of what Alice Paul said to a news reporter when she was asked why she dedicated her whole life to equality for women. She credited her upbringing here at Paulsdale and her mother's advice to her when she was a child. When you put your hand to the plow, she said, you can't put it down until you get to the end of the road. Like Alice Paul's mother, my mother taught me you never give up. You keep on trying, and if you get knocked down, you get up and try again. She showed me what it means to live a good life and what it means to work hard for a dream. I carry her example in my heart every day, and the work I've done in my career to honor women is in honor of her. When it comes to health care, I'm proud to have stood side by side with my good friend, the late Senator Ted Kennedy, to provide $50 billion to extend the state's children's health insurance program. There's an estimated 82.8 million mothers in America, many without health insurance for their children. And they needed to know that we were on their side, and we showed them we were. I'm proud to have required health insurers to provide coverage for breast cancer treatment when too many of those insurers were finding reasons not to. I'm proud to have fought for the Wise Woman program to give low-income and underinsured or uninsured women with the knowledge and skills needed to prevent or control heart disease and other chronic illnesses. I'm proud to have co-sponsored the Prevention First Act to help reduce unintended pregnancies, reduce the number of abortions, increase access to women's health services, provide local communities with grants to educate teenagers on preventing pregnancy. But I know when the unintended happens, decisions involving reproductive choice are difficult, deeply personal, and best left to the woman in consultation with her doctor, her loved ones, and her faith. And when I authored the Mentally Blocker-Stokes Mothers Act to combat postpartum depression, I said then, when we introduced the bill, I believe we need to make sure that the 10 to 20% of all new mothers who suffer postpartum depression, representing 800,000 new cases each year, are fully supported and informed rather than scared and alone. And I'm proud it is now the law. I know that making quality, affordable health care to every woman, every mother, every child, every American was the right thing to do. The law also includes my provision for a women's medical home demonstration project as a model to increase patient care and lower costs that specifically address women's unique health care issues. Let me be, from my perspective, very clear. The health care package Congress passed and the President signed into law is good for women, it is good for families, it is good for New Jersey. No longer will a healthy 22-year-old woman be charged premiums 150% higher than a 22-year-old man. No longer can insurers discriminate because of gender. No longer can they deny coverage based on the ridiculous notion that being a woman or being pregnant is a pre-existing condition. I think it happens to be a very good pre-existing condition. So as someone who for many years dealt with a broken healthcare system during my mother's long illness, I think I can say with absolute certainty she would have approved of my vote to make the system fairer, better, and more responsive for all of those who need it the most. She would have approved of my co-sponsoring with then Senator Hillary Clinton the Paycheck Fairness Act to strengthen prohibitions against determining pay based on gender because she believed in fair pay for a fair day's work no matter who you are. She would have been proud that I joined with Senator and now Vice President, I should say, Joe Biden, when we passed the Violence Against Women's Act, because she hated all violence and saw too much of it in her own life. As we celebrate Women's Equality Day, the 19th Amendment, the life of Alice Paul, and equality for women everywhere, I can say that the work I've done in my public career to honor women was really to live up the values and ideals that I was taught growing up. I don't presume in any way to compare my mother to Alice Paul, but I believe their different lives are different bookends in history. They represent the perseverance of all women in our society to overcome obstacles in their way and in their ability, as Sojourner Truth said, to get the world right upside again. Every American who believes in the basic tenets of this democracy carries in their hearts and throughout their lives the fundamental values we celebrate today, no matter their background, faith, race, or gender. Alice Paul and my mother grew up at very different times under very different political and economic circumstances. My mother left her home in Cuba as a refugee with nothing to come to America. She lived in a small tenement in Union City. Alice Paul came from an affluent family and lived at Paulsdale, Mount Laurel, on 265 acres of the family farm. But these two women shared universal qualities that bridged the generations, the ideas and ideals that define the American experience. Those qualities are a belief in the power of the individual, no matter who they are, no matter what they believe, to reach further, to try harder, a commitment to family, the power of community, each of us working with each other to better all of us, a belief in fairness, equality, justice, and work, a belief in the importance of education as a key that opens the door, a deep and abiding faith in the human spirit to prevail and endure, a faith, Christian or Quaker, that taught them to be tolerant and just. And each had a practical, powerful side that gave them a heartfelt determination to fight, in their own way, intolerance and injustice wherever they saw it. They believed that no one in America should ever be treated as a second-class citizen. They put their hands to the plow, one in practice and one metaphorically. It didn't stop until they reached the end of the road. They were all about change. One came to America and worked hard to change her life and give her family every opportunity to succeed, and one worked hard to change the life of every woman in America so that they would have the opportunity to succeed. My mother was not an activist like Alice Paul. She did not live the big life that Alice Paul lived, but she is representative of those who benefited from what Alice Paul did. Alice Paul was the quintessential social activist, militant in some ways, but dedicated to the cause of equality. A woman who went to prison for her beliefs and was subjected to harsh treatment with other suffragists. but it was because of that treatment and the public outcry about the abuse that she and others suffered that President Wilson finally reversed his position and supported passage of the 19th Amendment. We all know the history from there. It came down to Carrie Chapman Catt, the suffragist who knew how to count votes, something we still try to do today, and get things done, especially with filibusters, and get things done. And to the vote of one 24-year-old Tennessee state legislator, a young man named Harry Byrne, who had intended to vote no, but who famously said later he had received a telegram from his mother that said, quote, "Be a good boy and help Mrs. Catt." Harry Byrne changed his vote, saying, "I know that a mother's advice is always the safest way for a boy to follow." And the amendment was ratified. It was a historic moment. It was a historic moment, but while other suffragists saw the passage of the 19th Amendment as an end, Alice Paul knew it was only the beginning. She knew that there was something greater that needed to be done. In 1923, on the 75th anniversary of the Seneca Falls Convention, she announced that she would work for an amendment that she called the Lucretia Mott Amendment, unequivocally stating that, quote, "Men and women shall have equal rights throughout the United States and every place subject to its jurisdiction." That amendment became the Alice Paul Amendment, introduced at every session of Congress until it passed in 1972. It was perhaps her greatest legacy. In its final form, it read, "Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." Ultimately, Congress extended the deadline for ratification until 1982, but it fell 3 shorts vote of ratification. So let me close by saying, as a member of the United States Senate, I would put my name to any effort to repeal the time limit of the original bill.
Yes.
And I would campaign with all of you to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment, because every woman deserves equal and equitable equality under the Constitution. I think that would finally write the final chapter, would finally break the glass ceiling, and would create a new promise for America. Thank you very much.